Morning, everybody. Welcome to the combined meeting of the Strafford MPO and SRPC Commissioners. It's Friday, June 17th, 2022, 9:16 a.m. We have somewhat of a hybrid meeting. We have a big crowd today in person, and we have a smaller crowd, but still a crowd online joining us as well. So we'll get started with the first of the two agenda areas, which is going to be the Strafford MPO piece. And why don't we start in the room here on introductions? We'll start with Bill Fisher and go around the room, and then we'll grab everybody online. And please put up with me a little bit. We've got a lot of total people, different capacities online, and I'm going to attempt to keep that straight. And Jen's going to be my loyal spotter when people wave their hands and they're tired of me not seeing them. So, Bill
Fisher, Farmington.
Don Hammond, Rochester.
Raspberry Magri.
John Casper Lee.
Michael Williams, Post.
Joe Boudreaux, Rochester.
Barbara Holstein, Rochester.
Evan McDougall, Wakefield.
February Ronson.
Mike Babinski, Summersworth.
Mark Richardson, Summersworth.
Dave Landry, Dover.
Colin Letts, Strafford Regional Plan.
Jen Sis, Strafford Regional Planning.
And the folks that are remote, we'll start with Dawn.
Dawn Jeans Lee.
Thank you. And Peter.
Peter Nelson, Newmarket.
And Steve.
Steve Diamond, Barrington.
Ricky from DES.
Ricky DeSillo, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services.
Glenn, DOT.
You're on mute, Glenn.
Great. Glenn, DOT.
Okay, in addition, as I understand it, there's a number of different guests. And, Jen would have to help me out with this. Donna from Dover.
Donna Benton, Dover.
Brian from Rochester.
Hi, Brian Hetrick, Rochester Riverwalk. Good morning.
Morning. And we have a number of staff people as well. James.
James Berdine, SRPC.
Stephen.
Stephen Geis, SRPC.
Jackson.
Jackson Rand, SRPC.
Tyler.
Tyler DeStefano, SRPC.
Rachel.
Rachel. Sorry.
Yep. Running with Zoom.
Rachel Dewey, SRPC.
That should be everybody. And just so people know, when we do have to vote on things, we're going to have to do it through a roll call, as opposed to a showing of hands. This particular type of meeting. So letting everyone know that up front. Okay. So that's the introduction. So number 2, public hearing, amendment 4 to the 2021-2024 TIP. This does require a motion to open the public hearing in a second. So if I get a motion from somebody.
Motion to open the meeting.
Don, second, and Tom seconded. Need a roll call to open the public meeting too, Jen, or can we dispense with that part? I think we can because we all want to have the meeting. Okay, no, I just want to keep this within the bounds of reality when it comes to these questions. So, okay, so the public meeting is open. So, and Colin,
That's me. Is that screen share? Can everyone on Zoom see?
The wrong one. I'll stop sharing. We'll get it right. Get my Zoom people back.
You just hit escape because it's still in prison.
Over here. Share screen.
See, okay.
We're good. You need to be able to advance the slides. So you're not chopping people's faces off.
All right. We have an amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program. There are a few projects to touch on and talk about here. Some kind of standard project updates, a bunch of state programmatics that include child projects in the region. There weren't any major impacts to those child projects through those programmatic changes. The 108 Complete Streets project is changing a little bit. They're still working on final design, but that project is moving forward and is scheduled to start construction in 2024. So that'll be nice to see what they come up with for improvements, since that project's budget got doubled under the 10-year plan. The Milton Lebanon Bridge is still going full steam ahead. They've been waiting for quite a while and dealing with the red tape between two states and each dealing with half the bridge. Similarly, in Dover, New Hampshire, and South Berwick, Maine, a shared bridge there, but everything is moving forward on that.
Colin, before you move on, excuse me. So 108, the project doubled. Was that because of delays, or did the scope of what they're trying to do increase? That's a lot of an increase.
Yes, it wasn't because of delays necessarily. The meeting with the consultants, McFarland Johnson, was the last meeting in person I had before the pandemic jumped off. And they had a presentation with quite a range of possible alternatives for that corridor. And I think DOT saw, or many people saw, a lot of value in that project and doing the most for that corridor possible. So with the bipartisan infrastructure law funds, part of that went to double that project from, I think it was basically 15 to 30 million. So that allowed McFarland Johnson to really go back to the drawing board and see what was possible, to a full range from some of the corridor may have a separated multi-use path, some of it where bike lanes may be more appropriate, sidewalks and multi-use path. So they're going to come back to us with different alternatives and where those types of things are appropriate. So good question. Any other questions for people?
Just on that, I was going to bring it up at the end, but in your handout then, at least here, for the public hearing piece of it, I don't see the construction. I see the construction in the original approved funding, which is exactly what you're explaining, but I don't see it in the proposed fund.
Yes.
Is that just because we're focusing on PE and right away?
Currently, and so with the pandemic delay and the general delay with needed for more design, the construction years have shifted out a little ways. So the funding is still there, but the construction got delayed, and so it now shows up in 10-year plan, the following 6 years, but not necessarily in the tip.
And my last point about this for the group really is just McFarland Johnson and DOT love to hear a status update at some point, not now, but we had pretty active meetings prior to the pandemic. It's probably about 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And we're interested, I'm sure Rochester and Dover is too, in kind of where we're at. Let's find out kind of the status of the work of McFarland Johnson and bring us all together, make sure we're on the same page.
Definitely, and I bug them every few months, and
I thought you had a couple of things.
Yeah, there will be a meeting soon.
I would suggest sometime in the summer.
Yeah,
sometime before we.
Most definitely.
Thank you.
So for, interestingly, for the kind of the first time that I've seen with projects that were entered into the draft 10-year plan that is now approved, this was 2 years ago, projects from our region, those projects are being entered into the TIP for the kind of early stages. So one was the sidewalk project in Milton, and then 2 separate but geographically linked projects in Rochester on Route 11, and then a signal at Neshoba Drive, if you remember those projects that we all talked about. So the early PE funds are showing up in the TIP so that they can get working on those sooner rather than later. So just as a reminder, the Milton extent, this is just up the hill from the downtown. So new sidewalks that will connect residences, community features like a church and schools. And then Milton, separately from these federal transportation dollars, are doing some utility upgrades for stormwater and flood control and things. And then Rochester's project, it's a little fuzzy on the Google map snip, but you can, this is the end of the line up on the top left. You can see the beginning of the Granite Ridge parking, and then the tree clearing, that's phase 2 of the Granite Ridge development. So this is going to be traffic relief for the congestion along that corridor. And then right in the middle of it, thereabouts, is the Neshoba Drive. With up to the top right, there is the access to the residential area where everyone turning in and out of that currently, there are long wait times and a big safety concern. So a lot of people looking forward to this project moving forward. I'm glad to see it moving into TIP. So as part of the amendment process, we can add the amendment concurrently updates our long-range plan in total and our metro plan as projects kind of shuffle forward along the assembly line. So as part of that process, communities can request to add projects that are in our metro plan while this is going on. So Dover has a Central Ave Complete Streets project, sort of the southern section just south of downtown, that includes bicycle and pedestrian upgrades and some utilities. UNH is working on or has for a long time been working on a South Drive project that's partially complete. So we are putting those projects into our metro plan so that in the future, other federal funding opportunities may arise to help these projects. But they're, as far as I understand, they're kind of moving forward on their own steam with local funding. Dover's projects in the CIP, UNH is using UNH funds as well as looking for others in the future. So just a quick snapshot of where Dover's project is. And so, as I said, bicycle pedestrian improvements, it's in the CIP if you want to see more details. But they're kind of working on the southern bookend of downtown. And then UNH's South Drive, there is a partially completed road here. But as they complete this, it will be a major improvement for transit access. So they're just more efficient transit as well as connections to this part of campus, which is more or less cut off. You have to take a long way around. So pedestrian and stormwater and utilities and stuff along with this. And as I said, the amendment affects the metro plan in total. So as we add these 2 new projects, they go into the nearest 2 years of the out years. I'm anticipating that the projects will get done way before 2031 and 32, but they're in there more or less arbitrarily. But we make sure the fiscal constraint isn't over the limit there. So I think that was it for the amendment.
Anybody have any questions in the room? Anybody online have any questions for Colin? I think the waiting hand there on
There are no hands.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Colin. we will need a motion, I think, to close the public hearing on that, right? So if I could get a motion on close this public hearing,
I'll second the closure.
Don, and then Mike. D-O-N, Don.
Tom.
Tom.
Who's Tom?
Oh, Tom. Just a habit. Seems to have some part of almost everything. That would be Tom, T-O-M, Mike. Okay, and we're gonna need a roll call for this, or,
I think that if no one has any objections.
no one has any objections, we'll consider this closed. Thank you, appreciate your cooperation. All right, on to number 3. There's a couple of votes required here, so on A, approval of the draft minutes from May 20th, 2022. Yes, motion on that.
So moved.
Thank you, Bill. A second.
I'll second.
Bill and Mike. Any questions or concerns about the minutes from the May 25th, 22nd meeting? Anybody online? Any questions? Okay. Roll call on this one. Okay.
Want me to call names?
No, that's all right. Bill,
Yes.
Don,
Abstain, I wasn't here.
okay. Tom,
Yes.
Katrin,
Yes.
Mike. Yes. Joe,
Abstain.
Barb,
Yes.
Evan,
Abstain?
Herb,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Mark,
Abstain.
Dave Landry's yes, and online, I've got Dawn from Lee,
Abstain?
Peter, Newmarket, and Steve Barrington.
Yes.
That's everybody.
You have Ricky and Glenn.
That's right, we're still in the MPOP. Sorry about that. Ricky, DS,
Yes.
Glenn.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. That's unanimous. Okay, on to amendment 4 to the 21-24 tip. Back to you, Carl.
That is just, that's everything we covered, so we just need a motion and second and a vote to approve it.
Okay,
Motion to approve amendment 4.
I'll second it. That's Don and seconded by Evan. Thank you. And I think we're gonna need a roll call on this too, right? Okay, sure. Bill,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Katrin,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Barb,
Yes.
Evan,
Yes.
Herb,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Dave Landry, yes. And online, Dawn from Lee.
Yes. Yes.
Peter from Newmarket.
Muted.
Are you muted, Peter?
Yeah, I had to unmute. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Steve,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Glenn?
Yes. A little hard to hear you guys, that's all. Yes.
Yeah, we've got some work to do on that. If you're not the first person to bring that up, but it does help when more people bring it up if it's a problem, so let us know. Thank you. Okay, so on to discussion items. Number 4, updates to the draft non-discrimination plan. Jen, or Colin, okay. Thank you.
Everyone seeing the presentation again? Oh.
Yep.
So we have, it just started a public comment period tomorrow, a draft update to our non-discrimination plan. And the formal vote will be the next policy meeting in July. So I wanted to give you some updates, since I think you've seen various iterations of this, but there have been some updates.
And I'll just note, because we have several documents here today that are fairly voluminous,
Right, yes.
there are 3 copies out on the tables of the non-discrimination plan, as well as the CEDS that you'll hear about later. There's 1 per leg of the table out there. So Dave, I see you've got 1 here. I think the others are in front of Barb and Tom. So if you guys want to share those around.
So as a federal recipient or a recipient of federal dollars, we need to conform to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And so we need to ensure equitable access to our process, participation in the decision-making process, and so forth. So Title VI specifically identifies race, color, and national origin for protected classes that we need to consider. So since the draft you all had for you in the packet and the ones that are printed out here, I got comments from our friends at DOT, just noting that we need to be specific in separating the classes that are identified in Title VI from any other stuff we want to do. So race, color, and national origin are specific to Title VI, and we need to say we consider those. And in addition to those, we also consider other demographics like age, sex, disability, poverty, and access to vehicles. So we just kind of go above and beyond, and they required that we specify that. So that's why the red box. So there are 3 sections in there in the draft document where we mention more than what we're required to do. So I've just separated those, in the language a little bit more. Page 4 is our mission statement. That's also kind of reiterated on page 16. And then the complaint procedures on page 10. So all the same stuff is there. It just added a couple of words to separate those requirements. So 2 sections that are new since the last time you looked at this are limited English proficiency, or LEP. We're required to look at the census data, in this case, the American Community Survey data, to make sure that we're not missing people who can't participate in the process because English isn't their first language, but they still live in the region and have a stake in the development of the transportation infrastructure and planning in general. So taking into account the high level of error that comes with American Community Survey, because it is a sample, not a direct count like the census, the decennial census is made up. We looked at a few, so total population estimate, just shy of 150,000. Number of people who speak English or speak a language other than English, 9,457. And specifically, so the number of people within that group who do not speak English well. That's what we're looking at. So just shy of 2% of people in the region, based on PCS data, who do not speak English, or who speak English less than very well is the correct term. So that puts us over the threshold for folks who speak Asian and Pacific Island languages. So 1,400 people. The threshold is 1,000 people, or 5% of the total within that language group, whichever is less. That's just what the demographic requirements are. So at the TAC meeting, people brought up, good points that there are a lot of different Asian and Pacific Island languages. So there may be fewer than 1,000 people within those individual languages. But we have currently don't really have a way of accurately determining the total number of people who, we know there's an Indonesian speaking population, at the concentration in Somersworth. We don't know if that's more or less than 1,000. So I think at this point, we're just gonna move forward with as I stated in the draft document, identifying those individual population groups and finding translation resources. That's kind of our next step. So the Little Indonesia sort of organization that has been developing in Somersworth, they have a website, they actually have translation services. So I think we're going to look into that. There are probably resources at UNH that can help us. So one of the things we need to do is translate vital documents, and there isn't a clear, checklist of documents in the federal regulations, but we're thinking about, but other than the notice to Title VI beneficiaries that you have this resource accessible to you if you request it, is basically letting people know. So we need that to be accessible in multiple languages, as well as the complaint procedures and the form. We haven't received any complaints since I've worked here or long before that that I know of. We want to make sure people understand what an MPO is and an overview of the process, and then executive summaries of various documents like the work plan, the 2-year work plan, the metro plan, and then so we're not going to translate all 100-some pages of the metro plan. That is seems a little unreasonable and unnecessary, but as long as people understand what the metro plan is and how they can play a role in its development, that's what we're going to focus on. Any questions on LEP or thoughts? If folks know of resources they'd like to suggest, I'm open to it. We have a few ideas we're going to be pursuing. We do have Google Translate on the website now. And we have someone in-house who can translate documents in Spanish and has done so. But we're going to look for permanent solutions. And, I'm not sure how accurate Google Translate is. It's got to be better than nothing. But, ideally, the gold standard is a human native speaker. So we're going to be looking for getting close to that as much as possible. Yes.
It's only written by you. If we have a meeting
Right.
this morning, we don't have to have any.
That is a good question, something I need to look up. I think the written is the key component. I haven't come across any specific requirements for us to have a translator at a meeting. I know, on federal highways, webinars and stuff, they usually have someone who's proficient in American Sign Language. So if someone were to come to us with a request, we would have to figure out those logistics, and we would, of course, do everything we could to make sure that they could participate. Good question. All right. And as like I said, this is in a public comment period, so if something comes up later, shoot me an email or a phone call, whatever. And I put some maps in here in the presentation. These are all from the data snapshot that was updated for 2021. So the document includes a bunch of those maps in the middle. Environmental justice is separate from Title VI. Where we need to be clear about that in the document, but this is a related field, so kind of access and participation and making sure people are not discriminated against actively, but also are not separated from the process because of circumstance. In this case, environmental justice, avoiding, minimizing, or mitigating impacts to people who are more vulnerable to those impacts because of their circumstances. So the prime example that predates and is part of the impetus for the development of MPOs was the development of the national highway system, the Eisenhower interstate system, where the the best route, according to the people that designed the thing, was often through neighborhoods of color or low-income neighborhoods, and most often both at the same time. So those plenty of neighborhoods were bulldozed without warning and without reconciliation of any kind to build the new highway system, which we now benefit from. But those sorts of things are unacceptable. And so we're not planning on building any new interstates through any neighborhoods, but the impacts from development and improvement of the transportation system need to be equitable. So that may not just be a new road, it could be dust or noise. And if it's going to impact people who have no way of avoiding those sorts of things. So a good example that's not in our region is the sound walls on 95 through Portsmouth. Those people lived there before the high-level bridge was built, and they've had to live with not being comfortable having a barbecue in their backyard because of the noise from 95. That is something we don't want to have to deal with in the future. It shouldn't happen to begin with. So it can be anything from the noise of the jackhammer and the dust that comes from the building of the project. So how can we minimize that? Do we need to change the design of this project so that it doesn't have long-term impacts? That also comes with the need to ensure that the positive benefits of transportation development are equitably distributed. So public transit obviously has a huge benefit. We want to make sure that we're not just building projects in affluent areas, and that people who stand to benefit most from things like safety improvements, like sidewalks, that those sorts of things are distributed equitably, so that as we're developing the TIP and the 10-year plan and so forth, all the projects aren't just going in downtown building. Hopefully that would be a red flag for many people. All the money is in one spot, but we want to make sure that we have urban and rural communities getting projects, as well as areas where low income or access to a vehicle is an issue. Thank you, James. So to wrap up here, there are a few maps at the end where we took the first crack at putting points on the map where projects in the future are going to be located or are being constructed relative to concentrations with these groups you see on the screen here. So this is for the environmental justice analysis, and we'll be doing more of this in the future. If a project comes up, we want to make sure that we consider how the projects are going to impact people. So that was a lot of me talking. Any questions on that?
I have something from the mission statement. I don't know if that comes straight from Title VI or if it's changeable, but it might be worth adding sexual identity to include trans folks to that, if that's possible.
Question. Yes, thank you, Steve. I think, yeah, we can always go beyond. Yeah.
The next line seems to try to include everyone anyway, but yeah.
Colin?
Yes.
Title VI, where it applies to every municipality as well, right?
That's a good question. I know it applies to folks like us that are direct or sub-recipients of federal dollars. So Coast has a Title VI responsibility. I'm not sure it applies in some cases. I mean, it's not Title VI, but you guys have ADA requirements. That's something similar. That might be a different title in the Civil Rights Act. But I'm not, we may have different requirements than you guys because we receive federal dollars. If you have federally funded projects, there may be Title VI requirements for that project specifically, but that I'm not fully aware of.
I was just in your report, you list some example projects that would kind of fall into this environmental justice category, and I appreciate that because it kind of helps with kind of the more detail of, all right, so how does this get implemented and what do you think about from a planning perspective, design perspective, and construction. So that sort of answered my question, because I was just going to ask, how do we think about that in pending projects and so forth? How do we weave that in? Because both, these are listed projects, but we also have possible projects that are outside of this. But this would be related to federal funds, though, correct?
Yes.
So not okay.
And so as we have projects in our metro plan that don't have funding assigned to them, like in the 10-year plan or another program. So our role is to ensure that those projects are designed
with
EJ
filters
and Title VI in mind
Okay.
before they get to the preliminary engineering stage.
Yeah.
So there may be work to do with a consultant once they're assigned to a project, but we want to make sure, hey, if we want to build a roundabout in this location, is that going to require right of way acquisition from someone who doesn't have anywhere else to go, and it's take part of their property.
Thank
you. All right, it's 10 o'clock and we still have two other parts of this meeting to get through. So please contact me with any questions. I'm learning more and more about this whole part of the operations, so it's fascinating. I'm happy to talk.
Okay, we're going to adjourn this MPO policy meeting, correct? And we don't need to have a vote on that. We're going to move directly then to the next part of the meeting, and Venus, the Strafford Regional Planning Commission and EDD Board of Directors. Everybody's been introduced already. So right on into number one, the public hearing on the 2022 Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Update.
That's going to be James.
Yes,
James.
James is going to have screen share.
So all of James's time.
Morning all. Good morning. We are, so if anybody is following along in your meeting packets, the EDD materials start on page 94. There's also a link to the CEDS that is posted to the website separately. I wasn't going to start off with a large presentation. We discussed a lot of the details of what is included in this year's update to the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy when we were before you last month. So I will note we did get some public comments that came in via email over the course of our public comment period. That ended a week ago Monday. We are at this point at the final adoption stages. We've noticed a public hearing for this morning. So if you want, I can run through comments quickly now, and then we can open the floor for any additional comments by the public that are either attending in person or online. And then at a later point in this morning's meeting, we would be asking for a motion to adopt the CEDS update. Sorry, my workflow is a little bit off. I'm joining from my childhood bedroom on my wife's laptop. So I'm working with some unfamiliar conditions at the moment. So I'm not going to share my screen, but I'm going to run through the comments that we did receive. Some of them were simple corrections. The first one was a correction to an organization name that we've made. There was one looking at some of the infographics that we provided, specifically, a little bit of confusion about a title that we did update, and source of Amtrak data that we did not. We were using publicly available Amtrak data, and did follow up with the provided contact to see if we could have some of the behind the scenes things that would have allowed us to update the specific data for stations in our region. But we did not receive an answer prior to having to finalize this document. The next one was related to a few of the bigger picture discussion items in the education, workforce and education chapter, thinking about K-12 and post-secondary education and how those are discussed, as well as climate change and adaptation and its role in the plan. For the first one, I note a little bit later in the change document that we were making some larger changes to a few sections anyway, workforce and education being one of them. So I think that we were already working in some of that discussion a little bit better in the planned edits that staff had identified. For the climate change or climate adaptation comment, I think I will acknowledge that we don't refer to climate change or climate adaptation a lot in the discussion proper of the plan, but our action items for ourselves as the Planning Commission do track the considerable additional climate adaptation work that we do. And I think the other thing that I sort of have in mind for the next update, while we do a lot of climate change work, a lot of it ends up being project specific, either to our coastal communities or one community in particular. And I think as a result, because we don't have the same sort of general funding to do what makes sense and sort of explore different ideas and how to integrate our big picture plans, I think we've done a much better job of integrating this plan and our transportation documents so far than we have on the environmental side. We are looking at potentially doing some overhauls to our regional master plan in the coming year. So as the EDD sort of team lead, I've identified that as an opportunity to circle back in the next year about how we're talking about issues in the CEDS and how we're talking about separate issues beyond transportation in our regional master plan to make sure that we can leverage that process and align some of those conversations. So we have not made any significant changes yet, but if in your discussion you feel that there are some specifics that are needed, I'm all ears. Continuing through, we did not receive any specific change comments when we presented this to the Seacoast Economic Development stakeholders work group that we operate, who we've been using as sort of our strategy committee. We also presented this plan to all of you at the policy committee meeting on May 20th, and didn't receive a whole lot of sort of directed changes. Michael Williams mentioned that there were some changes in their ridership that they've been aware of with more recent data. So we made some tweaks to incorporate that data. And then finally on that change log, additional changes identified by staff. As I mentioned, we made some heavier edits to the workforce and education, childcare, and age friendliness chapters. Once we were able to sort of pause and take a breath, when the plan was out for comment, we were really looking at those and thinking, there were some things where we could have added additional nuance and detail. So we did keep amending some of that content, whereas a lot of the remainder of the document was some proofreading, some typos that were corrected, aesthetic changes and things like that. In the public comment document, there were several sections that were highlighted in yellow. Those were to indicate things like the adoption date. We wrote the plan, the introduction as if you were adopting the plan today, but yeah, obviously we don't have a crystal ball. So we wanted to make sure that we went back and corrected things like how many people were in meetings, how many people attended the adoption hearing, things like that. So we will be doing those edits following adoption for the final version that gets published on our website. We did also receive 4 project forms since we went out for public comment. 3 of those, I believe, were already listed in the plan as pending. Those were the Farmington Levy and Farmington's red listed bridges, as well as figuring out how exactly to list the Exit 10 project. We ended up listing that as a project sponsored by SRPC, but in the discussion, we noted that SRPC makes a lot of sense right now because it's in the 10-year plan. We have all of the information we need to track it. As we move towards implementation, we might need others who are more directly involved with the project management to sort of step up and redesignate that as something being sponsored by others. And then we did have 1 new project form that was submitted. That was the Rochester Riverwalk, which, if memory serves, has appeared in the CEDS in a prior 5-year cycle as a priority project. That project sort of continues to evolve as they are figuring out, what phases of the Riverwalk are we able to address next? What are we seeking implementation for at the time? So, my recommendation is that all 4 of those projects that have already been inserted into the draft that is posted online. We've updated the table for costs, number of projects, number of partners, things like that. I am recommending that all 4 of those be adopted as either submitted or amended at this point. So with that, I can take any questions, or if before we get too far into commissioner questions and discussion, if we'd like to open to the public for any additional input, I think that would be good as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to open the public hearing for that, and I'll need a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
John? Everybody is in favor of opening the public hearing. I think we can assume that. So the public hearing is open for any comments. Either here or online. I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
Is it for us too? Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just a quick one, and James, I appreciate the explanation about Spalding Turnpike Exit 10 and the description of SRPC being a sponsor of that project at this stage. Simply for the record, I acknowledge your last point about as the project, should it be funded and goes into that planning stage, that the implementation component of that is more involved with 3 cities. So we get that, and I think appreciate the level of effort that you guys went through. I know I had some discussions with Shanna Saunders in Rochester and you and Jen. So anyway, thank you for that.
James, here I'm reading, it says Farmington's levy on the Pacheco River lost accreditation in 2021. As a result, much of the town center will be reclassified as part of the 100-year floodplain. Does that mean sooner or later downtown Farmington is going to be washed away? And what's going to happen with this levy?
So my understanding, and granted, I'm representing my understanding based on, largely conversations with Kyle, who talked to EPA or to the Army Corps. So this is a little bit third hand. My understanding is that it in the same way that a bridge might end up on the red list, there are many ways that that can happen. And it might be that the bridge is about to crumble and fall into the river below, or it might be that the guardrails aren't built to the correct specifications. I don't have all of the details to know exactly why exactly to the extent that the levy lost its accreditation, but in some way it no longer meets all of the required standards. So yeah, as far as I'm aware right now, this is largely an administrative change that if you don't meet all of the standards as a levy in redoing the flood insurance rate maps, they cannot say that, yes, this will definitely protect downtown. But as far as I'm aware, for right now, we're talking about a reclassification where a lot of the consequences are more likely to be inconveniences as a result of this place being designated as floodplain. I'm not aware that we are approaching a doomsday scenario where a heavy rain is going to flood the downtown. But again, this is with third-hand information. I am not Farmington's emergency management director. I am not plugged into the best available data for that. So I think for as far as the form went, we were trying to get some general information in there to be as flexible as possible and support them however we can. They are currently working with an interim town administrator, so the back and forth of information has been a little bit more difficult than under typical circumstances. And I'm sure that as we continue to have those conversations over the year, we will hopefully be able to improve the detail of that project understanding.
The big thing with the Farmington levy is a contest between the Army Corps of Engineers who put in the levy and FEMA, who has a different idea of how the levy should have been put in. And right now there's no danger of Farmington flooding. The levy has passed all inspections by the Army Corps of Engineers. We're waiting for FEMA to come out and say what's wrong with our levy. If push comes to shove and FEMA does not approve the levy, it's going to make all of downtown a flood zone where it's not right now. And that's going to create hassles for insurance and those people living in the downtown area. If the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA can come together and decide and compromise and work together, I think everything's going to get worked out. If it's not, we're looking at millions of dollars to rebuild and redesign the levy. So that's all up in the air right now. It's between government entities and our town administration trying to work with them to figure out exactly what is wrong with a perfectly fine levy. So one problem that we did have, some of the abutting residents had put personal property up on top of the levees. We had to get that moved and some brush moved. But other than that, the levee's in good shape. So we don't have to worry about Farmington or the surrounding areas flooding from the Cochico.
Thanks, Bill. That's good detail to have.
Bill, does anyone else have any questions here in the room? Comments? Anybody online have any questions or comments? Okay, so let's close the public hearing at this point. Is that what we need to do?
I think so.
Okay, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second by Trent. Okay, I'm going to assume everybody's in favor unless somebody says they're not. Okay, close the public hearing. Thank you. Thank you, James. Moving on to the number 2. These are all action items requiring a vote.
Mr. Chair, if I might suggest, could we move up the vote on the SEDS itself?
Sure.
In consideration that James is hanging out in his childhood bedroom.
Oops.
Well, we could put that after citizens forum on number 5. No. Sorry, James, it sounded more personal than it.
Let him return to
Sure,
his
we can put
vacation.
D first before A. So, to start, we will need a vote adopting the 2022 SEDS update that James gave us.
So moved.
I'll second.
Is that Bill?
Don.
It's Don. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking up. I apologize. Don and Mike.
I've got the Texas twang.
Quick question for notes.
Go ahead.
Who was the motion to close the public hearing?
Don.
Dawn?
Yes.
And seconded by Katrin.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. So we had a motion and a second on adopting the 2022 SEDS update, and we're going to need a roll call for that. Quite sure. Joe,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Don.
Yes.
That's all. You guys are playing with me now. Tom.
Yes.
Okay, Katrin,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Joe, Barb,
Yes.
Evan,
Yes.
Herb,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Dave Landry, yes. Out remotely, Dawn from Lee,
Yes.
Peter from Newmarket,
Yes.
from Barrington.
Yes.
And since we are into this new section, we are not including DES and DOT, is that
Correct,
correct?
and I'll note that Michael Williams
think I.
was not a voting member for that item. Sorry.
Sorry, Mike, didn't mean to put you on the spot. Glad you didn't say no, though. Okay, that passes. James,
Thank
you
you all.
can, haven't already left your child's room, you can. Back to the minutes from February 24th. I can't recall, do we have a first and a second on that? And switch gears? No. I need a motion to accept the minutes from February 24th, 2022.
Motion to accept the minutes from February 22nd.
Don and Tom. Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments on the minutes? Anybody out online have any questions or comments? Okay. Does anybody have any objections? Okay, well, that passes then. Moving on to letter B. Adopt fiscal year 23 budget recommended by the executive committee. This was something we took up at the prior meeting. And who's going to talk on, is that you, Jen?
That is me. Okay, good morning. So I'll walk through and give you some highlights of the draft fiscal 2023 budget. Our fiscal year starts on July 1st. So this is for, literally a few weeks from now and our work plan for the coming year. Just starting on the summary table side, there are some shifts between our current fiscal 2022 and what we have slated for 2023 between our various revenue streams. This is essentially broken out by where our funding comes from. It's just by and large, it's a shift of, we have more grants coming from federal sources than we do from municipal sources in this next fiscal year. More so than state agencies. On the expense side, again, just some basic shifts to reflect staffing levels that correspond to the programs, as well as some shifts in the contracted work, again, that corresponds with those programs. And I'll go into a little bit more detail each of those items. I know this is microscopic. Hopefully for those who are online, it's a little bit better screen sharing. For those of you here in person, you know what, I should actually be using the real file for the screen sharing. So I'm going to stop screen sharing because there were some minor changes made. Give me 1 second for those of you online that do not have the printed copy in front of you. Revenue tab. This matches what those of you have printed in front of you here today. Okay, so now let's try screen sharing again. Okay, so so on the revenue side, a couple things to highlight that are changes. The change in municipal dues, as you remember, we level funded our dues. We voted on that back in the fall. But you'll see that there is an increase in dues from what was adopted in fiscal 22. That reflects the fact that the towns of Lee and Milton are now dues paying communities. And so when we put it on the revenue line, we exclude dues from those communities that decline to pay dues. So we now only have 2 communities that are not paying dues. That would be Nottingham and Brookfield. Then moving on to the municipal agreements, a lot of these are 1-year agreements or smaller agreements, so you'll see some fluctuation from year to year. The draft budget has everything from fiscal 22 retained, as well as adding things that are new for fiscal 23. A couple projects that are sunsetting at the end of this year, the Geodata portal project that we worked on, the POP project, the Promoting Outdoor Play project has concluded. And let's see, we have a few more so on the under the state funding section of things that are concluded. Some new items that we have coming on for this coming fiscal year that have actually just kicked off this month. We have 2 master plan updates that we are working on. We are doing a draft transportation and future land use chapters for the town of Barrington. And we have a comprehensive master plan update for the town of Strafford, as well as a smaller project doing some accessory dwelling unit updates for the town of New Durham. So those are the kind of the bigger changes on the municipal side. On the federal agency side, 2 notable items that are changing, or 3 notable items, I'll say. Our CARES Act grant is sunsetting at the end of September. So you'll only see like 3 months worth of funding remaining under the CARES Act grant in the economic development line. We continue to have our annual $70,000 planning funds for our economic development programs under EDA. Unfortunately, our new application for the Brownfields program was not funded. So our current Brownfields grant ends in September. We will be reapplying. So hopefully a year from now, we'll have different news on Brownfields. But for the next year, we will not have a Brownfields program after September. That said, we will be receiving earmark funds from HUD under their Economic Development Initiatives. CEDS stands for Congressionally Designated Spending. We put in a request originally the request was to prepare our housing needs assessments and do a little bit of an update on the regional plans. Well, we received ARPA funding this year to do the housing needs assessment. So that's getting retooled a little bit to integrate the housing needs assessment into the regional plan and do a regional plan update. We, as Strafford Regional Planning Commission, put that earmark request in on behalf of all 9 regional planning commissions in New Hampshire. So you'll see this significant amount of revenue. This is half of the funding that we'll receive. We've split the funding between fiscal 23 and fiscal 24. And we will be subawarding to all 9, the other 8 regional planning commissions. So that you'll see on the expense side as one of those big changes in the contracted items. Moving down to state agreements, you'll see many of our DES funded items are sunsetting. We will be doing a new round of applications, hopefully later this summer and fall for some other DES funded items, but for the interim, we have several that are sunsetting and we're in between grant cycles. So you'll see several that are zeroed out. Those are just projects that are concluding. We have others that are going to be ongoing projects that will be moving forward. On the DES side, let's see. And the other ones are kind of holding steady. One thing I'll note, Department of Safety and Homeland Security, we were supposed to have additional funds this fiscal year to start working on the next round of hazard mitigation plans. Those usually start in January each year. We are still waiting for that contract. And we have been told that it is slated to go to Governor and Council in July. And we recognize that this is creating a bit of a pinch for our communities that are in this next round of hazard mitigation funding, because if you're looking to apply for certain funding sources that require a current hazard mitigation plan, they're expiring, and they're expiring soon, and they're caught in this position where the grant dollars have not been made available yet. So we'll be working with communities along those lines. On the moving to the MPO side, have more on our UPWP. This is more or less a deliberate split where we put more funds into year 2 of that contract. It is a 2-year contract, so when budgeted, we put more into fiscal 23 than we did into fiscal 22. So that's on the revenue side. I'll kind of pause here if there are any questions on the revenue side and our simultaneously an update on this coming year's work plan.
Just a quick one, Jen, about the Brownfields funds, and I think you mentioned this in our previous meetings. So no new funding for FY23.
Correct.
Doesn't mean in 24, 25, you could get more fund, you'll apply again.
Correct. There'll be another funding round this fall, and we will most definitely be putting in for that funding round.
I mean, it's significant because you guys have been quite successful with using those funds and helping communities. So would like to see that. You're wrapping up FY22 things, right?
Correct. Yeah, we have. So they're federal program funds. So those work on the federal fiscal year. So that goes through September.
Okay. Thank you.
Overlaps ours. Okay. On the expense side. Larger. You don't need to see our margin notes for where it is in the overall workbook. So on the expense side, we have some changes within the salaries and wages line. And this is predominantly making sure that our staffing aligns with our programs and what we have. We do have an open position that we will be posting soon because we do have, we have 2 staff members that have recently left. And then we have Natalie's position only runs through September under the CARES Act. So we'll be taking those positions and bundling them. And then we'll have another position. This also has another position starting in January as well. And let's see. So then, and then it also includes just the annual salary adjustments that happen on July 1st. You'll see the other items that correspond to those that are tied to payroll, such as our health insurance and our disability insurances, payroll taxes, and the like. Under staff training and workshops, we've increased this a little bit this year with the intention of providing each of our staff members $1,000 kind of allocation that they can use for professional development and training opportunities over the course of the year, and making sure that all staff have access to that opportunity. On the equipment side, by and large, things are holding pretty consistent and stable. One of the things that is changing significantly is the computers and peripherals line. In the last fiscal year, we had several of our computers that were end of life that we replaced. We also had some related equipment that we purchased under the CARES Act grant, including the scanning equipment in fiscal 22, that those expenses will not be in fiscal 23. Communications line, this is just our our basics, postage, phone, etc. Those hold constant in the coming year, minor changes. We had originally, for this current fiscal year, budgeted to replace a couple desk phones. We did have a few additional staff members, so we needed to increase the number of lines that we had this fiscal year. We will not have that expense next fiscal year. Fixed expenses, this is our property and liability insurance that did go up. Part of the reason that went up is because we had a significant premium holiday under our current fiscal year. So that had our fiscal 22 rate down lower than it would have otherwise been. Our rent remains, our vehicle expenses and our rent remain the same. Administrative expenses also similarly fairly consistent. The big difference on the office expense here is that staff currently have been receiving a $25 per pay period stipend for working from home under COVID. That is continued through December in this new budget. So that's compared to having a full fiscal year worth of those stipends. Travel is significantly reduced, not because of anticipated significantly less travel, but because we didn't hit this amount in fiscal 22. And with the addition of a van, our mileage reimbursements are significantly less. So this is now having more information from having that van online and being used. Budget line has decreased it accordingly. Then outsource contracts is the other item that I mentioned, was a big change. So you'll see that we have several projects that are zeroed out. One item that has changed, financial services. Kathy, who many of you have met, Kathy is our financial manager. Kathy used to have her own business and worked on contract for us previously. She has since sold that business and is an SRPC employee now. And so that financial services line is zeroed out, and Kathy is included now in the salaries line. IT services, this we are bumping up because we do need to replace our server in this coming year, and we are going out to bid for our IT services. So we've included in here the costs of going through and migrating to a cloud server system. That's one of the big ones there. We have a couple contracts that are sunsetting, therefore, of course, the associated contractor costs with those is zeroed out for this next fiscal year. A couple projects coming online that have pass-through funds. The most significant of which is that HUD earmark, where we've got $50,000 times 8 regional planning commissions that will be sub-awarding in this coming fiscal year. So that is the updated budget in a nutshell. in a little bit, then, so.
Anybody have any questions on that, Drew? Budget? No? Anybody online have any questions for Jen? Okay, so we will need a motion on that.
Motion to adopt fiscal year 23 budget.
It's Don and Tom seconded. We need a roll call on that too. Probably most appropriate thing. So, okay, Bill,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Katrin,
Yes.
not Michael. Barb,
Yes.
Joe?
sorry, way ahead of myself. Joe,
Yes.
Barb,
Yes.
Evan,
Yes.
Herb,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Dave Landry, yes. Online, Dawn from Lee.
Yes. Yes.
Peter from Newmarket,
Yes.
Pete from Barrington,
Yes.
and I think that takes care of it. Thank you, everybody. That passes unanimously. And now we're on to C. Elect fiscal year 23 officers and executive committee members. This was an item we addressed at the earlier meeting. It comes to this group. For approval, review and approval. So, can you think in this or do you want?
Sure, I can do that. So we currently have 7 executive committee members and 2 vacant alternate seats. Our current serving executive committee members have all expressed their interest and willingness in continuing on the executive committee, as well as continuing in their current roles. That would be with Dave Landry as chair, Peter Nelson as vice chair, and Tom Crosby as our secretary treasurer. Our 4 regular members are then Dawn Hammond from Rochester, Barb Holstein from Rochester, Mike Babinski from Somersworth, and Bill Fisher from Farmington. I will note in your packet, there is an error on Dawn's commission term expiration date where it says here 6/30/2021. The correct date is June 3rd, 2025. I was able to look it up. So just with that note, so I guess at this point, we would be interested in making a last second plea for any interested alternates. I know I cornered at least one person to say, would you be willing and interested? So we'll throw it out there, I think, to see if we do have folks that would like to fill in those 2 vacant seats before we call for a motion on the slate of officers.
I want to add something. Go ahead. Was that a? We'll consider it wrong.
I think it was caught.
Yeah.
A lot of catching here, yeah. Katrin is interested in an alternate position. What I was gonna say, just to put some things in perspective, any of these different committees and things have quorums that are expected, or you can't have meetings. And when you look at the group here that we're talking about, the executive group, we have to have 4 people in person here in order to have a meeting. No one can really recall us ever being able to get 4 people to come, because there's actually quite a few people, as you can see, and we managed to make that work. That's the only purpose of me saying that is that sometimes people can get intimidated or whatever by time commitments, and because life is what it is. And so the point is as an alternate, everybody's welcome to attend, certainly encouraged to attend, especially from a learning perspective to understand what the role is. And, but try not to get too intimidated by it, because we do manage to get the group together. And unlike some of the months, over the past 2 years with COVID and different things going on, where there was like a mad scramble down to the very last second to get, a meeting together. We had to suspend the rules, I don't know how many times. That's not the dynamic here. That was the first comment. And then secondly, I guess a personal note, and I think I might have said it before, I attended one of the meetings, and just because I'm loath to say yes to joining much of anything, if somebody's willing to let me just kind of sit in on a meeting and, see what goes on and how people behave and treat each other and whether the subject's interesting and all that. So I did that, and I think the same thing, Bill did the same thing. So he ended up on the executive committee, much like I did. Same kind of idea. He came to a meeting and may have twisted your arm a little bit, Bill, but
No, not too
not
much.
too much.
I just couldn't stand to see Jan cry anymore.
Yeah. But then there was that, yeah. So in any event, so we'd love to be able to put 2 names on here. And if you want to do that, that would be great. Just wanted to have some perspective on not getting intimidated by the time commitment, and you have to absolutely be here. You're going to cause havoc. You'd be unleashed, because it's not the case. There you go. And I don't want to feel like a teacher, like everybody's looking at their shoes. You guys are great, because even when you're not going to volunteer, you just look right at me. I just love that, That's the adult way to say no. Good. Appreciate it. But anyway, anybody that wants to talk about it privately and wants to bring it up afterwards can do that too. And there's speeches for people online too. And I'm not keeping anybody out of it. So Steve's already on the Peter's already on the executive committee, but Dawn and Steve as well. So either say something now or say something later. Although I do have a point of order question, I don't know the answer. If we adopt what we have to vote on this.
Mhm.
If we do that and somebody says tomorrow or next week they want the alternate position, how does that get handled when it's not like right now at the meeting?
Under our bylaws, the executive committee, mid-year can appoint, or any point during the year can make appointments to fill vacancies. And then when we come back the next year, we'd have like the full slate of officers again, to reconfirm.
Okay, it doesn't even have to be an agenda item on a meeting or anything like that
We would-
until the following.
Right, we would just put it on the executive committee
a year-
agenda
a
as,
year from now.
no, we can do it at any point during the year. We can fill vacancies if we have vacancies.
Okay, okay. All right.
Will we ask again at the annual meeting next week?
We certainly can.
I think that's a good idea. If nobody has stepped up before then, I think that would be smart, because there are, not a lot, but there are some people that are on the policy committee that are not in the meeting today,
Correct.
correct? Well, it could be from the tax group too, right? Isn't that
No.
true, or no?
Has to be a commissioner.
Okay.
On
I'm
the
sorry.
executive.
All right.
Yep.
Clarify that. Okay. Thank you, Katrin. Anything else? Let's give them a call, or give me a call. So, a motion.
Motion to accept the slate of offices of the executive committee, including Trent this fall.
Okay, there's a second on that. Thank you, Tom. You roll call for that, or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Bill.
Yes.
Don.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Katrin.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Barb.
Yes.
Evan.
Yes.
Herb.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Hey, Landry, yes. Online, Dawn.
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome. Lastly, oh, that pushes us into other business, doesn't it? Yes, because we, okay. 3, other business and updates from staff.
All your updates. We just did a lot.
It's okay.
Thank you.
If there are updates, I can't take it.
I will say, the only update I will say is next week is our annual meeting. I will note that, so typically what we just did today would be on that annual meeting agenda. But because this is our first year back in person, we decided to play it safe and still keep the business items here today when we knew we would definitively have a quorum, and then focus on just going and enjoying, and thanking everyone for being a part and making their contributions and enjoying the lunch and the guest speakers at the annual meeting itself. If you have not registered and you would like to register, well, we have already called in our catering order, and we had to do that yesterday. If you would like to attend and you haven't, just send Megan or Shayna an email. We can still add a few people to that list if you didn't get a chance to register. So,
And the number of people that are,
yeah, so we currently.
Is it 51? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's 51. We have that we submitted with that catering order yesterday. That includes staff and speakers, but it's still a very respectable turnout considering this is our first time doing an in-person event like this since 2019.
Okay. How about Commissioner Ryan? I'm sorry, Joe.
Yeah, no, I'm not part of staff, but I am here representing the Resiliency Committee.
Joe.
Yeah.
And we're having our next session on Monday from 9 to 10:30, and it's about food. If you go to the grocery stores lately, where you see some of the reports of what's happening vis-a-vis food, food resiliency is really significant within our environment. We're going to have a couple of speakers talking about what's happening. Part of it's going to be very, very local. Part of it's going to represent more of a state perspective. But the key is to have people hear what's happening. And then there will be a, for want of a better term, a call out that says, so what can you in your communities do? That may be on a personal basis, but it may be from a Rochester or a Dover, whatever. How can you support this? So we very much hope that if people haven't registered, that they will. And having said that, if you know people that you think would be interested, please reach out. This will be both in person and we're happy to have folks.
There is, but I know Colin always does. I'm just jotting a note down to myself. Colin always does a wrap-up memo that he sends out to everyone, and we'll make sure that the registration info is included in that.
And Joe, this is probably the first of what will probably turn out to be 2 actual. You expand on that for a minute, just so people realize. Not that you have to come to the first one or else the second one on the meeting list. That's not my point. It's just that big, huge, important topic. So
yeah, so we're going to reach out to registrants and potentially other folks as well, asking what they think the next topic should be in this particular area. What should we be doing more about food, and what are the areas of interest, and then we will develop something around that.
in this case, the topic seems quite large and it had enough different facets that could be distinguishable, that trying to squeeze it all into one meeting and in an hour and a half or so have 5 or 6 guests sounded like was not going to work at all. So we decided to slow it down and be more comprehensive.
To that point as well, sorry, my mind is just clicking in. But also that point is the representatives are going to have on Monday represent a couple of areas. But I think what you're suggesting, and we know there are other people in the local environment as well as the state environment that can give us more in-depth, I think, the subject matter. So just, it's not just two people that can represent this, there's a lot more. It's going to be here.
It's gonna be, I think, fully virtual. Oh, fully virtual. It's fully virtual.
Well, I apologize.
Yes.
That's because on the other meetings, you come here.
Yeah.
And we track you down. And then you join from here, I think. Or something, right? That happened. I don't even embarrass you, but it's happened a couple of times and we're having fun with you on that. You can come here. Joe can come here, right?
No one will be here.
Actually, to your point there, I was here and the meeting was not here. And I struggled to get online.
Okay, I thought you had joined from the one star. Okay, anyway, yes, it'd be interesting. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else have anything about from the communities? Want to share? Thank
Yes.
you for the finding the flood subject for Farmington. We all got kind of worried there.
So you were, you know, you need to find their insurance, because it's going to increase. If they can't get FEMA and Army Corps of Engineers can't come to an agreement, it's going to increase the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain, by about 75%, which will cover almost all of downtown. Our post office, the library, the bank's gone, the churches, everything will be underwater. So we'll be snorkeling. But there's nothing wrong with the weather for the Army Corps of Engineers. FEMA don't like it. Go figure, it's the government. So,
I have something, if I might raise something here, specifically addressed towards Glenn at the DOT. So as rotaries have gone in on Route 4, is the challenge, it seems, is to educate the users on what the traffic pattern, the rules, the user convention is. The adding of yield to both lanes at the Lee circle, that has clarified who has the right of way. But I happened to be in the right place at the right time to notice at the Little Bay Bridge rotary, I was heading west on Route 4. So there happened to be a bicyclist. I guess there's a button to press and then you get the right of way to cross at the edge of the rotary. It's a red thing that flashes. It's pretty small. I was the only one who stopped and someone else paused for a moment. And it felt a little unsafe to stop at the rotary, given the speed of the traffic. I wonder if there's a way of clarifying who has the right of way and what's supposed to happen when that button is pressed. Thanks.
Yeah, help answer that question. I'm pretty sure that everything that was probably put in was done under the MUTCD, what we Federal Highway recommends we do. But that's something we can bring up to our Bureau of Traffic and see if they can recommend some additional signing or something for that those circles.
Cool,
especially the bicycle one there. I tell you, I'm not even aware it was there, so it probably I've never seen it used. But yeah, I can see you're right. People do not expect pedestrians or bicyclists to cross at that intersection, which unfortunately makes it very dangerous because it's just not an expected crossing. So there might be something they can do with signing there. It's worth an ask.
I just have a quick question. I've been through there, but I don't remember this. Are there bike lanes in a rotary, or do you have to enter like you're a car and quickly move to whichever? How does that work there? Is there any?
This one does not have specific like a Sharo or a bike lane in it. There are sidewalks, so I think the understanding is that a cyclist would act as a pedestrian and use the pedestrian crossings. It is fully within the right of a cyclist to use the lane as a car if they're bold enough and fast enough. That's a little death defying. But yeah, so and I'll Stephen, Glenn, I'll also look this up because as the replacement for the General Sullivan Bridge comes online and as Dover continues working on a footpath connecting Spur Road all the way up to 108 in the near future, we can expect potentially more pedestrian activity along here. So if there's something we can do to improve.
Are there any blinking red lights when the pedestrians use the button?
There were, but it was pretty small and high up, and I don't think anyone else was looking for it.
Okay. Thanks for that, Steve.
Thank you,
I'll
Steve.
check it out.
Yeah. It's helpful.
From our town on Monday, we voted to go forward with both. So yes.
Okay, so if you have time after to chat about that, make sure I got my ducks in a row. Cool.
Perfect, thanks.
Anybody else have anything?
Oh, for Rollinsford, we want to thank Colin. He made an extensive visit, a lot of research and prep, spent a ton of time with our select board a few weeks ago. It was hugely helpful. So thanks for the services you guys provide. They were blown away by all that you do, and hopefully we'll start to engage.
Thank you.
They understand it.
And
Excellent.
I'll follow up because I responded to the police chief, I believe. He sent me 3 years of data, and if I get 10, I can get a little more detail on if there may still be, road safety audits in the future.
No, thank you.
We'll keep that going.
Great job.
Thanks, sir.
I just was, when you mentioned road safety, it just dawned on me about the, let's see, what's it called? Safe roads?
Yes.
Safer streets and roads.
For all
or something. And your note about the possibility of applying for a planning grant.
Yes.
With the other, maybe regional planning commissions.
Yeah, I'll mention that. So the Safe Streets and Roads for All program is under the bipartisan infrastructure law, is basically set up to do kind of comprehensive safety planning at the local level. So the first round of funding is for planning grants. Most places are not going to have an approved, usually it's called a Vision Zero plan or one that counts as a comprehensive safety plan. So many communities, if they're interested in applying for implementation grants in the future to build a safety improvement project, will need I forget what but a comprehensive safety plan under this law first. So what me and my other MPO colleagues talked about is the potential for the grand scheme would be all 4 MPOs applying for a single grant to hire a consultant to write a plan that would then make all of the towns and all of our MPOs eligible for implementation grants in the future. Instead of 18 municipalities writing individual grants and applications, just have one big one, get it done, and then in a year, if communities are interested.
What I thought was interesting is if I follow the grant detail right, those are 100%, or no, not 100%. There may be a local match, but they're administered by the city or the town or the public entity.
In the future, the implementation grants,
not through DOT.
Yeah, so DOT, the states are not eligible
Which is interesting.
for these grants.
Yeah.
So there is 20% local match in both cases. So we would need to come up with that in some way. Other MPO and RPC folks are in discussion internally and so forth. So if this is a possibility, we would have to, the applications are due September 15th, so we have a little bit of time, a whole lot of time. But there would likely be, we have, SRPC, as I understand, has a little bit of funding available to match a grant if it's in collaboration with other MPOs. We would want to assess whether communities are interested in implementation grants in the future. Just to make sure that we're, that this is a good effort. So those can be Safety is a pretty broad topic. It can be pedestrian, traffic, pretty wide range of things. There are a number of what they call approved countermeasures that Federal Highways promotes, like the pedestrian retroreflective the rapid flashing beacons you see like in downtown Dover and Rochester, where the person pushes it and the lights flash, and it's much easier to see than the little light on the roundabout, and it is pretty clear and useful. So that's just one.
That's good. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Anybody online have anything further? Okay, next would be citizens forum. I don't think anybody was there other than us two. Okay, so we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Don. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for everyone for being here for that.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.